Chat with Dr. Andy Walshe, founding partner and chief performance officer at the Liminal Collective. I'm Amanda Terry, your host and creator for this virtual fireside chat series. We're very excited to have Andy here today to share his life's work and passion, which is enabling humanity's boldest endeavors and advancing the boundaries of human potential. From professional athletes and Olympians to creatives and the Department of Defense cyber hackers to startup founders, he's researched and trained people across the gamut to enable them to boost their performance and achieve even more incredible feats, even when those people are seemingly at the top of their field. For those of you who don't know what Acti Global is, we're a nonprofit and community of athletes, conservationists, technologists, artists, and innovators that bring our collective knowledge, energy, and social capital together in active gatherings, which we've now brought online. Our community supports projects benefiting environmental conservation and economic empowerment via entrepreneurship. Together, we've brought to life a marine conservation area with Mission Blue, and in 2 weeks, we'll actually have the president and founder of Mission Blue, Dr. Sylvia Earle, on with us. And we've also supported other conservation organizations such as Ocean Elders, Virgin Unite, the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and Lonely Whale. We've also catalyzed gatherings around the world, including the Australia-based West Tech Fest, the Necker Blockchain Summit, and the Extreme Tech Challenge, which recently just had its finals. Acti was also a partner in the formative stages of the 2030 Vision Project to bring technology and multi-stakeholder partnerships to solve for the 17 UN sustainability goals. I think we've given people enough time to get settled in, and just some quick housekeeping notes for this virtual gathering. First of all, this fireside chat is being recorded, so anything that you're putting in the chat box, people will see we're on the webinar, but won't be part of the final recording. And secondly, we love to make this interactive and have you ask your own questions. So for those of you that are logged in on the Zoom app, you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you click that button and submit your questions, we'll put them to Andy live. And if you want to include your name, company, or where you're from, I can read those out as well. If you're also having any issues logging into Zoom, you can join us via your local phone number that was in your registration email. And if that's how you're joining us, you can email us questions at fireside@acti.global. With that, I always love to have Bill kind of come on and give a few words about maybe how he met Andy, and then we'll get into some Q&A with Andy Walshe.
Yeah, this is it's awesome to have Andy as part of our community and on the webinar today. Years and years ago, I was looking for interesting speakers for one of our events on Maui, and I came across the Flow Genome Project. And I ended up meeting Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel. And I noticed that on the board of this, or the advisory board of this project, was this interesting gentleman, Dr. Andy Walshe, who at the time he had the incredible title of Chief of Human Performance for Red Bull. And I was like, what is that? And as I started to learn more about his work and what he did to tune people, and in particular tune, you look at the Red Bull athletes, there are 700 or so of them, and there's a handful that are super outstanding. And, typical profile might be a 15 to 19-year-old athlete that might be 50% better than anyone else in their field, and thus sponsored by Red Bull. And Andy was actually helping them get even better. And it was just fascinating to me to know the kind of work he was doing. I learned he was working with DARPA and a bunch of other agencies to just kind of create superhumans out of humans. And later, Sabine Schinbauer, who used to work with Red Bull years ago, made a personal introduction, and we asked Andy to come out to one of our gatherings in Utah, one of our snow kiting trips, where he gave an incredible talk about how to tune yourself and the work that he does. And that's turned into a multi-year relationship where we have collaborated on a bunch of interesting projects and conferences and physical activities, where he forced me to stay underwater for a lot longer than I ever thought I could. And I just thought, wow, this is such a great guy to have on a webinar, and we need to include him into more of our things. So we're looking forward to weaving together with his new project, Liminal Collective, over time, and throwing a bunch of functions and pushing all of us on this call and beyond, way beyond what we ever thought we could do individually. So with that, Dr. Andy Walshe.
Oh, no, thank you, Bill and Amanda and the community and ACTI. I mean, you just kind of, you sell a great story there, Bill. I think it's been just a fantastic journey. I think there's so many fundamentally similar things about the way we're aligned with respect to looking at the future and how to improve humanity outside of the individual performance, but sort of taking that scale and, all those experiences you mentioned have just been sort of partnerships where we've learned so much from the different people in the world around. If you think about being exposed to all that talent across all those communities and just listening and learning to what they've done, and they already know how to be world class. They're already great at what they do. We sort of sit in the background and just help, sometimes just catalyze and enable. So it's been just a fantastic opportunity to learn over the years, and hopefully today we can share some things that have some relevance to your community, and more importantly, maybe just get fired up about this whole idea of human performance and potential, and get some more people engaged in all the fun stuff we get to do. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you again for joining us. I've been reading some of the Liminal Collective blog posts and getting quite inspired, but I guess kind of if we were thinking about a little bit chronologically, how does one become an expert in elite human performance? And maybe you can give us a little of your background and what inspired you to do what you do today.
There's a great question, and I think the sort of analog version is I became trained as a coach in the human sciences, human performance sciences way back in the day in Australia, and at the time part of the institute system down there, the Institute of Sport, where there was a very formalised structure put in place to develop the small population, not a great talent pool. So the ones you find, you have to sort of hope that and support in such a way that they do really well. So, but I wouldn't say, there's a couple of sort of nuances to that question, and I sort of touched on in the intro, the idea that there's already this staggering talents out there, and everybody has this innate potential. So, the expertise you actually gather in human factors is more around sort of seeing a lot of different versions of people pushing the boundaries of what they think they can do in it. And it's more on just an awareness and an understanding of the different approaches people bring to the table to take on different challenges. And that being said, that's the very baseline. The human system is the most complex entity in the universe. There's no more entity more complex than one human individual. So I would say no one's an expert. I'd say we have, on a scale of 1 to 10, the people who've been living this life for as long as I have and others very similar, we probably know out of 10, we're a 2, which people go, oh my God, you don't know much. Well, I say, well, 2's better than 1, and we were 1 a few years ago, so we're learning a lot. At the same time, so much opportunity to really dive into this extraordinary thing that is a human. And that, in the context of nowadays, things are moving so quickly, and the understanding of human talent and human performance is accelerating so fast. No one's an expert anymore. You just can't be an expert. It's just the lessons learned and the information being gathered from the new sensors and the technologies. So I would say no one in the world is an expert, but we're getting really good at becoming expert learners. So we're actually accelerating how we learn. So there's a really interesting nuance there. So huge opportunity in this field, and that's how we look at it.
Very cool. And I see actually a couple of people on here who were associated or former athletes at Red Bull, including Kristen Ulmer. So Kristen, if you have a question, we'll turn on your camera and you can ask it to Andy directly. When I think of Red Bull, I usually think of these, extreme sports athletes. But as you said the other day, it's also creatives, esports. I mean, it really kind of covers the gamut of human performance. So I guess one question for you is just like, what was your most surprising discovery while you were working there? And I know you were there for a while.
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I think there's so much I learned in that period of time. I mean, again, anytime you take on a new community of talent in a field that is less sort of prominent. So let's take action sports sort of blasting into the world in the late 90s, early 2000s, and all the work to date in the sporting or performance world have been done on more mainstream sports. You're sort of in an aggressive learning cycle. It's sort of like you throw everything out and you start to sort of open your eyes again and start from ground zero. One of the most powerful lessons that sort of stuck with me was we'd come from working with CEOs, we'd come from military programs, we'd come from traditional sports. And suddenly I was working with these skateboarders and watching them just practice and practice and fail and crash and fall and make mistakes, and everyone's cheering and celebrating. I'm like, my God, how different is this to, 2 weeks earlier, Super Bowl prep practice for the game? The just the staggering freedom of exploration and creativity that was occurring. And these people were performing on big stages and with high consequence. Take our big wave surfing or big mountain skiing community. The idea that they'd never had coaching formally, they'd never had nutrition, they never had the traditional performance sciences behind them, and were pushing boundaries beyond even what we'd seen in mainstream. So I recognized then the big lesson that if you get the environment right, i.e. the mountain, the natural, the waves, the skate park, you get that environment around a person, and the environment is such that it teaches you what you need to learn, you can actually grow and accelerate coaching and human factors to a staggering rate. So we'd lost sight of, the science had come on hard, and we'd lost sight of the culture and the environment. And then that was tripled down when we started working with the creative community, the musicians, the artists, the designers, the filmmakers. Again, zero context for us, dropped into that community and how they'd learned and excelled and gotten to their levels of perfection or mastery without all these other systems that we thought were so important. But we learned so much. So then we started to blend their systems with the traditional systems and came up with these powerful, powerful experiences that seemed to shape and help.
Very cool. And I know you also worked with, I'm not sure if it was when you were at Red Bull or separately, but you did a lot of work with Olympians. So I guess I was kind of curious, have you worked different games or specific games? What teams, what sports, and what were you doing with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, on the start of my career, I was sort of Australia, sort of back in the day, we were working with the Summer Olympic programs in swimming and rowing and cycling, and stuff that Australia is sort of better at. And I sort of got my sort of cut my teeth in that community. Then I took a job with the US ski team and snowboard program as their performance director. So I got thrown into Winter Olympics. So I spent 3 years Winter Olympics with that group. And then at Red Bull, we had Olympians from all over the world. So that sort of thing started and morphed. And again, staggering lessons and learnings for me over those years of Olympians versus professional sports in terms of they're completely underfunded in many respects. They don't have the access to some of the resources. But again, the tenacity and the passion they bring to what they do. So again, just massive learnings. You're just listening to their stories of how they got to the top of their game, and you saw people maybe like a Lindsay Vonn, who the first time I remember she came into our training center in Park City there, and just a young kid, and then you see her 15, 20 years later crushing the world with her talent, her skill, and watching that progression. It's just so much to learn. I mean, I could talk all day about all of it, but it was just a great time. And the Olympics to me is still a very special place because the idea that every 4 years in either summer or winter offset, you get the world together and you watch these countries march in country by country by country. And it's a staggering thing to see and be a part of. But then what's really powerful to me is that at the end of the Olympics, they're all in their room, they're all in the field together, and they've all come together. And the stories and the personal lessons that you just hear from, the girl from Croatia talking to the kid from Australia, to the guy from the US, and they've made these bonds and they've connected. And the original intent of the Olympics was to, fight it out on the sporting field and connect the world through sport. And I think that mission and vision still, to me, is the most powerful thing about the games.
And speaking of Olympians, we actually have Julia Dumovitz on, who's an Austrian snowboarder, and she won a silver in 2013 and then a gold also in the same games. And, she was, I guess, also in Sochi in 2014, if I can brag about you a little bit, Julia, and became the first Austrian to win gold in snowboarding. And she's now starting her own company, which is super cool. But anyways, hopefully she'll come on with a question later for you as well.
That's something to teach us more than I have questions for her. I have questions for her.
Well, I know, I wanted to talk a little bit, we've been talking about the athletic side, and we'll obviously get into that a little bit more, but we were talking also about your ability working with cognitive performers, and especially like Department of Defense people. And you kind of shared with us an interesting video. So I was wondering if you could roll that and then kind of talk a little bit about how you work with cognitive performance, not just athletic performance.
Very big waiver at the start, typical DoD.
Well, I'm not getting sound. Are you getting sound, Andy?
I'm not getting sound, but I think I can talk through it if you like. I mean, what you're seeing basically.
Yeah, talk through a little bit. Okay, great.
Yeah, you're seeing the 175th group here come together, which is, let's just think about it. You know, what's the future of human performance? That's something we're always thinking about. Where's human performance headed? And, you know, obviously we spent many years, as you mentioned, athletically talking about what athletes are good at, but the physical domain being strong. When you think about the future of human factors, it's the cognitive domain is just becoming more and more prevalent. And as you see here, they're doing some exercises based on Cirque du Soleil. They're doing some basic fundamental movement exercises. Here, they're actually practicing hacking. Interestingly, that screen you see is a set of sensors on them, so we can measure how much stress and performance pressure they're actually exhibiting in the state. Here, they're being physically challenged and then asked to solve a tough problem. And, you know, one of the final evolutions you see them with the glow chem lights on, they're dragged out in the ocean in the middle of a night, and we swim out a couple of miles off the coast of California here, and we sort of spend as the dawn comes up, we spend time reflecting. The whole program is designed to drive, one, a sense of leadership and understanding of what it takes to be a pioneering element in human factors. So human factors can't be just, let's get physically fit, let's eat better, let's get our psychology game. Creativity, how do we push the boundaries of thinking differently? Because you think about this community, problems coming at them, you know, cyber challenges, cyber threats coming at them every single day, and the numbers are staggering. And how do you outthink that adversary on the other end, and how do you counteract that cyber problem? And for us, it was just another unique community to dive into and think about, all right, this is the future of human performance, dominant cognitive performance. And, you know, you can't default purely to the physical domain because they just don't use that in their day-to-day performance per se. But how do we think about reimagining the training and conditioning of that group? But for us, always a second and third order objective. So first order, obviously top performers, highly selected, doing things with their brains at speeds and rates we've never thought. We have the esports community that we're also focusing in. What can we learn from both of those to help people who sit in front of screens? And for us, it would be education. Can you understand the stresses and strain of lots of decision, lots of challenge on a screen? Think about, we cracked that code, what it could mean for kids sitting in front of their SATs on a computer, or people just facing daily programmers. We've actually been hit up by programming people who have communities of high-level programmers who, as I've got to learn, are just like elite athletes. They're getting paid staggering salaries, and they've got these jobs where they have to get this code done right in a certain amount of time for the, you know, the big companies in the world. And we start to think about how do we help them perform. So there's all sorts of interesting nuances to sort of why we do the stuff with those communities.
Very cool. And I read the article, you kind of pointed me in the direction of Kai-Fu Lee talking about, you know, at some point with AI, machines can outperform humans on many different levels, and kind of what's left at the end of the day is really, you know, creativity and compassion. Love to hear, you know, as you think about the cognitive performers, I mean, how do you boost, are those two elements, you know, relevant to them, and how do you boost those in those already, you know, relatively high performing groups of people?
Yeah, it's a thread we start on. It goes back to the time at DARPA when I started to see over the fence in terms of what was coming, because that organization gets to see new systems, as you're probably aware if you know the group. They play 30 to 50 years out for the US government, and they have solid budgets to explore stuff 30 to 50 years out. And, you know, I started to see with some of the experts in AI that they have there, some of the progressions that were happening. And we very quickly, you said, all right, we started with this idea that the machine can do this and the humans will be able to do this. And then on that spectrum, next year the machine could do more. And the machine, and finally we started to see what the humans were going to be really good at was getting very, very narrow. And it triggered a thought, which Kai-Fu Lee then did a much better job than I did of explaining. So this idea where we move forward, if it's a highly pragmatic, practical, sort of rote process-driven goal that you're trying to achieve, the machine will take over. It sees better than us, it hears better than us, recognizes patterns better than us, it can do all sorts of things better than us, but we still had to teach it to do that. But so the machine takes all that off the plate. So what does that leave you left? Well, we started to then explore, and this is where liminal, sort of the formation of liminal on our big threads is creativity, compassion, courage, empathy, virtues, so to speak, if you like, if you want to bucket them all. They're the things that we now have a chance, not a threat, but if the machine is going to take all the busy work off us, how do we accelerate and actually massively aggregate our understanding of those frameworks? And they're the least understood. They're the things everybody writes up on the wall or puts in their mission statements or value statements, but no one has real frameworks around how to train or prepare them. So we started to look at that, and as we thought about it, we even said, well, no, let's not stop at that. Let's go to what is super compassion? What is super empathy? What's extreme courage? How do we start to actually push that spectrum way back out and create this whole new space for human optimization, right up to telepathy and sort of other cognitive sensing suites, and we started to play in that space. And that's why our biggest drivers now, and even our top performing communities, are all coming to us looking at making humans better at being human and letting the machine take all the rest of it off. And that's where we started to get into these conversations, and it's taken a few years, but the highest performing groups we work with around the world are all now focused on that. Not that they're not doing the other stuff, but they've got a model for all the other stuff. They're now how to explore the edges of that space.
So I'm curious, because you probably work with these terms all the time and have a lot of examples, but like, what does it mean, like super compassion or super empathy? Can you give us an example of that?
I think we're still defining it. I think we understand the common day explanation. Like if you think of in the context of performance, high performing teams, high level of empathy, understanding yourself, understanding the others around you, really being able to communicate effectively, all that. But what would it look like if we took it to another level? What if we really focused on extreme versions of that, where you were so deeply connected to other people? You were so intrinsically aware of yourself and intrinsically aware of the environment and the people around you. And you start to think it's a very ancient model that we're starting to talk about. So we're kind of coming full 360, and you're starting to think about, well, holy hell, where does that really manifest itself? What are the tools we can bring to life? And powerfully natural environments is where that starts to really grow, because you strip away all the other distractions. So now we're finding a real powerful driver in the human performance narrative of why we have to continue, as I know this group's all about, protecting the natural spaces. So nature is our sort of playground, is how we frame it up. And we're thinking about this context. And I think, is there room, and are there skills even inherently in the human brain on that sort of, if you take that narrative further to the right, that we still haven't untapped? And you think about a mammalian brain and what its capabilities are, and really it's one of the most powerful systems in the world. And if you feed it the right inputs, without getting too technical, it can adapt and grow to do things that are extraordinary. And just look in the natural environment and look at the mammalian and dolphins' brain with sonar, things like that. I think there's an opportunity, if I really get out on my limb, to start to explore untapped, unproven, and unsort of imagined experience of human capability that we still are sort of not even close to. And I think if we can take that narrative versus the machine's going to take everything over and put us out of work, we're in a better place.
I was going to ask this question at the end, but I kind of want to ask now. If you had a dream team of, let's say, 3 people you could study, maybe a cognitive performer, an athlete, and a creative, who would you pick? Not to offend any of your clients, but
I couldn't pick, because I think what we've learned is inherently that the top performers teach us something about a very specific area of mastery in a very narrow field. but everybody has something to offer. And I think that's why the collective is part of our community. The Liminal Collective is why we approach it now. Is if you look across massive talent platforms of people who are, the parent of three, maybe solo, holding down a couple of jobs, trying to just keep their world together. That person has learned probably more about resilience and overcoming adversity than many of the top talents we work with in some cases. So everybody has something to offer. I think the dream team is now, and part of the platform we're trying to work towards is, how do we bring the horsepower of really powerful back-end AI platform to the conversation of human factors, but in a way that integrates the intuition of all the wisdom and expertise of many of the people, like you said, on this call. And I think that was the premise of the Hacking Creativity project we did many years ago. So human intelligence marked with machine grunt work intelligence captured with global human experiences. And I think when you start to look at those models where they're working really effectively, is like in high-level government programs where human intelligence and machine intelligence and that are solving problems. I think there's an opportunity. That would be the dream system, and which is sort of the anchor point to the sort of conversation we had earlier about the sort of how do you bring all that together in the sort of compound concepts and things.
Yeah. Let's go there. I mean, I'd love, you kind of were talking about, and I put a Facebook post together around, NASA meets Esalen meets the Olympic Training Center, for basically human, potential optimization. What are you doing in that realm, and can you describe it in your own words?
Well, this is sort of how would we to pull back. What's missing in the human factors world is leadership on scale. So if I was to ask anyone on the board, where do you go to get better at what you do? There's probably, hey, there's an institute on this, and there's a space to do this. And I'm an athlete, I go to scientific athlete lab. I'm a creative, I might go to the art shows in London once a year, whatever it may be. So what we found out when actually the fortunate sort of stumble we made at Rebel was we had a record studio next to a high performance sort of like Olympic Training Center lab next to a cognitive performance space, i.e. for the gamers. And the collision of those communities is where we saw insights and opportunities and staggering revelations that we just never would have imagined. And as we started to integrate those communities in a really powerful way, like deep shared experiences, not just getting together and talking about stuff, but putting them together in the middle of the woods or whatever it may be. We started to have this sort of ideation form, which was the notion that, God, the world is coming to us because of this unique thing we've sort of stumbled across, this unique diversity of cognitive diversity and collision, aggressive collisions of people. Let's just take that and make it real. So we started conferences using that community. We started workshops using subsets of that community. And then we thought about, well, what does that place look like that is that natural environment that really allows us to bring those experiences to life, but you also have a space for the top cognitive, spiritual people in the world to come in, but you're bringing in top athletic, human, sort of physical talent, and then you're bringing in the creative community, the artistry, the insights and the lessons on human factors from all those groups, and you collide them in one place. And that's where we thought, well, it needs to have high level leadership in terms of thought, kind of, Davos-ish idea. But you want that real backing and proven science that's sort of more the NASA model. And then you think about, well, it's all about human optimization and ultimately having a lot of fun doing it all. So let's make it a playground. Let's actually do it and host it. And then what's its mission? Well, put that AI back end underneath it. So you're actually aggregating global lessons and learnings on this framework. And then you're distributing it. You're pushing it out to the world for free to let them be part of the conversation, not just a bunch of very privileged individuals getting together and having it. You're actually democratizing it immediately in a way that they can interact and give feedback. Hey, I tried what you said over here in South Africa, and what you said actually doesn't play out here. This is what we learned. And so you've set up this forward leading And so that model was the idea of the human compound, which we had for many years. And we've built many facilities over the years, but no one's actually pulled this sort of thing together. And then what do? Well, let's put the hardest problems in the world, global development goals, cancer, education, whatever it may be that you think, versus as much as we love the sports and performance side, and get that community to crack into those. And then, like we talked about on the earlier call, treat those individuals solving those toughest problems, like say a group of scientists working on climate, like you would any elite talent, like a Venus or a LeBron, sorry to use the North American references, but you start to think about those individuals who are solving the toughest problems in the world aren't getting any performance support whatsoever. And so let's put them in this, give them the same tools and power and back end that you give people who are sort of entertainment, if we take sport. And you're starting to come up with this idea of a model of really cracking in. And then that's part of one compound that then is connected to others around the world. So you're starting to build this hub of hubs and that whole model. So that's in a nutshell what it is.
That is
on paper. That's what it looks like on paper.
okay. I was going to ask how much is vision and how much is like already happening, or you have physical space, or where are you?
We haven't cracked the space, and I think you nailed it. I think we've tried every element. We've had our glimpses of elements where we've brought that community together around conferences and conferences that have actual challenging physical feats. I don't know if you came to the one where to get into the conference, you had to jump off the building into the airbag to actually earn your right into the conference. You had to actually.
I was at the Malibu one, which was.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I can't remember what challenge we had there, but we always have something that throws people off. But the idea that we've tested that on, we've tested the idea of, the AI back end with the hacking creativity. We've tested the idea of putting non-traditional performers into this framework of performance and accelerating their growth. So we did take a group of scientists at one point, top engineers, top computer scientists. We put them in these programs and see they've had impact. Now we definitely need to tweak them. So we've tested all the elements out over the years, so we know all those pieces work. So now it's about we're not actually that worried about the land and the buildings, because that's actually just mechanics. That's the easiest part. It's the right people around the table who want to do this and have it be something that probably doesn't really kick into high gear till after we're all dead. It's a legacy we want to leave for the benefit of our children. And so we've started just gathering a very small community, aka the early days of TED, where we're talking about it. We're trying to make sure we get the right group in, and we're really thinking about getting that critical vision and tightening up the plans and the processes and all those things to a point where we go, all right, now we're ready. Let's go out and just get some money and build the thing. Yeah, that's to us. We've built many human performance facilities over the years. That's a 30, 40, $50 million thing. I mean, some of the people engaged in our community, those challenges are not the issue. It's the right way, the way it can live and the way it can grow and the way it can be of service to humanity. We've got to get that community right.
Very cool. And just kind of backing up, maybe you've described it in some ways, but for those that don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about Liminal Collective. When were you guys founded? What's your mission? Who's a part of it?
Yeah, thank you. It was sort of a growth of what we naturally were doing. So, kind of as Bill put it, kind of had a dream job at Rebel with this extraordinary talents and these people and doing these amazing events and things. But there was always this sort of something that the piece that was missing for me was the idea that we couldn't democratize it, because, it's not in Rebel's interest to just set up a system to give all this away to the world. It's not part of where they're at. And that's the organization. But the reality is we had over the years, our community of human performance sort of people, that group, we'd identified around the world those who were not only really talented at what they did and were good at what they did, and maybe a nutritionist or a biomedical engineer or a spiritual leader or a shaman. We'd found that group. But we also found within that group, there was this sort of subset of people who were really thinking about, well, what's next? What's the future? And how do you actually take on problems that no one else wants to take on? So how do you put that community and bring that horsepower to bear on problems that are really challenging, next level, that will test us, that will put us in a place where we're scared, nervous, we have to figure it all out. And so we thought about if we can aggregate that global community around really cool pioneering projects, some super fun, some hopefully do good. So we're testing ourselves, but then democratize and share that information out. That's the birth and the principle. So it says humanity's boldest endeavors. So we've looked at things recently from, liquid breathing under the water, so, the abyss model, to taking, for brands, reconnecting a particular brand back to the ancient wisdoms and traditions for talent, and how do you bring character back as a key marker of human factors, so, ancient wisdoms and things like that. And we just, looked at, stuff in space, stuff on the ground, but they're the sexy ones, but it's also simpler things like how would you redefine an educational model based on the latest technologies and the latest insights into human performance that we have. And so that's the birth and the principle. So it's about, yes, let's take on a crazy, amazing projects that really just show the power of the human and push the boundaries of human condition. But that's also captures people's attention. How do you get all that and then say, how do you make a difference to kids? How's that young person who's really struggling, and nowadays more than ever, to come to grips with, mental illness is a huge issue. Some of those tools that we've highly tuned at the top of the game are very applicable. In fact, more applicable to younger people and doing day-to-day things. And so there's a whole opportunity there of how we want to frame it up. And that's where it ties to sort of the compound idea, because ultimately, eventually you need a space to pull this all together. So very early, only a couple of years in, still figuring it all out, still trying to figure out what projects, the right people, but we're just slowly getting our act together. And content, movies, there's a couple of things coming up in that world where we have an opportunity to demonstrate some of these things to a broader audience, and we're starting to play there a little bit.
Very cool. And I remember you were kind of saying, thinking about human performance 180 years out, that you did something recently with the Royal College of Arts. Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing with them?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, we think creativity for us is the ultimate expression of human thing. If you can be in a life or death situation, the world is going to come to an end, or you're going to die, or high stakes, high consequences environment, not only can you keep yourself cool and together, but you're actually coming up with solutions that are around the corner, ahead of the curve. You're thinking 3 steps ahead. This is one of the markers of top creatives. And that's what they do. Not always in life or death, but that's sort of the end state for us. And when you think about the idea that when we're trying to imagine the future in human performance, in sort of fields we're in, one thing we've learned is that when you're in that field, you're the last person to imagine the future. Now, you can imagine a near-term future pretty well because you know the trends and you see the patterns. But when you're trying to think way, way out there, you've got to bring in cognitive diversity. And what we found, like in the Royal College of Art, as a partnership we're building there, is that the top design school in the world, I think for the last 5 years, the talent they have and the experience they have and what they do, when you point them towards a problem like human performance 100 years out, they actually can handle it. They can actually think through it. They don't get hung up in the what ifs and it wouldn't work. And their minds are so open and so fresh and aware, and their processes are very much about exploration, that we did a project on that particular topic where 400 students spent a year thinking about what it would look like. And then they presented to us sort of what they saw. And you saw some staggering sort of visions of the future. And it was powerful because some of it was like, very much anchored on sort of human sustainability in many levels. There was a lot of that emphasis on just keeping us together. Like, forget human performance, just for human survival for 180 years. So that some went down that path. But others went down, more minority report angles on how to optimize the human, how could you actually have genes that you switch on and off to help grow muscle, repair things, so we got all sorts of crazy stuff. It was fantastic. And again, it shows you that in any given area, bringing that diverse community together, you just get you learn more than you contribute in many cases. And that's the power of that sort of accelerated lessons learned in that space.
And I love the article on the Liminal website kind of about COVID and how we're in this liminal moment as a society, kind of transitioning from where we were to where we're going to be, and how we can look back kind of on the ancient rituals and rites of passage to help us through this, because humanity has been surviving plagues and other things throughout the ages. I guess along those lines, trying to tie a little bit what we talked about before, but when you talk about human survival and some of the work that you've done in the mental health space that could be applied to children, I mean, and or even any adults, like what are some learnings kind of coming out of this COVID crisis and from the work that you've had around maybe mental and or physical resilience that you think would be applicable for people today?
What I think is really powerful about the COVID experience is, I think from our lens, is the fragility of a lot of us. I think a lot of people were caught by surprise by this, as you naturally would, just unexpected. But my underlying assumption is a lot of the stuff, because we've been so deep in it for so many years, that people really probably had a good basis to get through this. But what the inbounds to us as a community were, I just don't know what, I'm lost. And I think we've lost, and that to me is a metaphor for where, as a society, I think we've lost track of some of those ancient sort of skills and things that we've learned as a race. And people felt like there are no man's or no person's land, I apologize for that, no, in this space where there was no real anchor for them to sort of, why, I've never been like, felt like this, I've never been in this situation, what can I do? And as we started to unpack it in lots of conversations, everybody actually inherently has the tools. They sometimes need to be reminded, or they need to be awakened, and sometimes educated as how to put them together. But fundamentally, the human system is highly, highly adaptable and resilient. So you just have to kind of reconnect the dots. And I think an awareness and awakening was one of the first things that we recognized, that people just, once you started to talk about the principles behind it and how important it was, and reframing it from, yes, it's hard. And again, I'm lucky. I still aren't facing the challenges that most of, or a lot of the world is facing, death and loss of income and all those horrible things. So to be very clear, people are going through hell, literally and figuratively. And I think, is there a way, without diminishing their experience of helping them sort of understand that there is a space to grow here and learn from? As hard and as horrible as it, people will come through. We will get through it in one way or another. And how do we help them navigate that? And I think it came back to a lot of the lessons of just being back to the tools of, human community. Just fundamental community is one of the key things to resilience. Building a community to allow you to express and explore what you're going through and share your stories with others. And when you go back to ancient models and getting around the campfire every night and just sharing stories amongst your community, the tribal idea, isolation didn't help that. So these are some of the things. And again, I don't want to burn all the oxygen on the topic, but they were our little insights into this thing, obviously. And then we started to connect to other communities that had insights, and we just started to share those. And I think that's where, again, the power of all this started to realize that now more than ever, recognizing the human element and how to help the human, given all the technologies and everything else that are going on, that re-emphasizing the human skill and the human condition. And that was a big takeaway for us, and why we started to get more fired up about the compounding and the idea of accelerating. We kind of put it away because we figured we had other work to do, but we're now like, no, it's time we start to help bring something like that to life.
Interesting. And just heads up, would love people who want to ask questions. If you want to have your cameras on, let me know. Just send me a chat and I can turn them on, just so I'm not surprising you. Otherwise, I'll read out the questions. Want to make sure we have some time. We have one from Joyce Ogie. And speaking, you're just talking about kind of AI and data collection, and she wanted to know your perspective on wearable technology and how it impacts, augments humans' performance. She was thinking about the Olympics, for instance, where steroids are banned, but certain types of uniforms, fabrics, watches can actually help athletes. And as those become more prevalent, she wanted to understand, what do you think is fair, unfair, in terms of, the types of materials that you can buy to enhance performance?
Hey, great question. So my general read on wearables is I think they're helpful. in terms of an education process. I think the issues we see with why people adopt them and then throw them away is a function that once you've learned what they're teaching you, there's not a lot more to do. There's maybe a check-in that you'd like. A lot of them give you bad data. We've tested many of them. In fact, lots of just about everything on the use. So you've got to be very careful how you interpret it and understand the way you do it. What I'm wearing one right now. I'm wearing a new model of a glucose monitor real time. What I find is the most stickiness and what the most appreciated information coming from a wearable is when it gives you non-obvious insights. So once it tells you you're sleeping well and they're great, but when it's telling you things you don't know are happening and you don't have real-time feedback, and then I find people, the information has far more relevance and greater impact. And that's just from experience. Is it fair or not fair? I think if you're not an athlete competing in the Olympics, and you love the idea of learning more and just being very cautious of interpreting the data you're getting, but finding a useful way to apply, go for it. I mean, play with it, explore and understand, because the challenge with human performance and one of the issues we face is there's more BS in the system than there is reality. In fact, 95% of what you read about human factors is probably false. And what people default to then is generalized findings. Oh, if I go keto, I'll lose weight, right? Which all of that stuff is actually true in one respect, but false in the most respect. And that's that law of averages. You're taking global findings and trying to apply them to you. The one thing you've got to keep in mind with all that technology is that you are one of a kind. You are an individual, and when you're trying to tune you, it's a precision idea or model that you have to follow. What works for you will not work for the person next to you. What hurts you may help the other person on the other side. So what you got to think about is, yes, I can look at this broad landscape of information and get some maybe starting points, but then the perfect wearable would be one that came in and gave you who you are, what you're doing, and what your responses are, and fed that back into a system. And we're actually working on some AI to do that. And you become an N of one, not an N of thousands or tens of thousands. It's you. And that's how we treat the top talent we work with. So long answer, but I wanted to make sure I covered off on a few things there
that's great. I want Julia to ask a question. I mentioned she's the Olympian now entrepreneur, and we're proud to have her as part of the ACTech community. And I'm gonna unmute her here so she can ask a question for you. Oh, there we go. You're still on mute. I don't know why you're.
Maybe now.
Yes,
There we go. Hey, Julia.
First, thank you for taking us through this awesome topic. It's so interesting to listen. And my question is, what do you think about in flow state? It's this pure connection, and I always have the feeling it's healing for every cell in my body, right? I can relate. I have a similar feeling in a deep meditation. And would you say that when you make the decision of focus and then letting go, getting into this flow state, is it the same time like pure healing for every cell in our body? And is it possible, let's say, to achieve a huge goal by goal setting and just making the decision of letting go, like all the time, just letting go, and spirit or the world itself will get you to this flow state all the time, so you can heal your body on the journey? What do you think about that?
A great question. I think the flow question is something that, again, we've been obviously part of our sort of conversation. I'll try and answer some interesting conversations we've been having lately. Recently, we pulled together some of the world's top neuroscientists, and we put them in with a bunch of hyper creatives at Cirque du Soleil, and we just had them collide ideas. And the thing that we keep hearing nowadays more than anything is that flow is such a specifically individual experience, and it's something that, and something as an example, everybody has their own version of explaining. There's a lack of definition around. So I love where you're going on the healing side, because I think it's connected to a part, but I think figuring out what that is for you, and say for performers, it's more about what the audience is feeling than what you're feeling and how they connect to that community. So it's a very unique, depending even on the area of mastery you're in. So I think that's the challenge we have with it, to understand it properly. It's given it's so nuanced and like anything else with humans, so specific to the individual. So there's a precision performance, precision flow conversation that's creeping into all our dialogue. On the healing side, do some states accelerate healing and growth and regeneration? There's some fascinating stuff that's popping up now with respect to deep space travel, because they're looking at how to put people into a state to, you know, not go nuts when it's take you several years to get to where you're going. Again, ancient wisdoms flashing back, connected to another individual deeply researching the Aboriginal culture and the ability for the Australian Aboriginal community in the traditional environment to sleep out in the freezing cold and enter a state of sort of transient deep sleep. And I've got to think of the term for it. Anyway, it's not hibernation. It's not like a bear, but it's close. And what they're showing, when they get into this state every night, they sort of, you know, lying sort of naked in the desert floor, temperatures below zero, and their body temperature stays fine all evening, and their baby next to them stays fine. There's some research that's been re-investigated now, because this was done in the 40s, on can you induce that state? And then what they see in some of these sort of early tests and on induction is that the cellular regeneration and growth is accelerated. So I'm trying to pull together two very different worlds, but I think there is something there. I don't have an answer to you other than when I look again, this is this global community of human factors. There's so much happening in all these different pockets, and no one's really pulling the threads and pulling them together. But can some certain states accelerate growth and regeneration? Absolutely. Sleep's a simple version. There are opportunities in a flow state to probably enter some of those states, or define flow in your world for what it is for you to connect those two dots. I think there is. So you're, again, being where you're at, you have a good interoception of your body. You probably are aware of things that are going to be the frontiers of science and performance. So this is how we learn. You teach us what you're feeling, and then we're like, okay, how do we hack that out? So.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting if you have like a goal in the future and you focus on that goal already and bring yourself in the future in that flow state already, and then in the here and now, just letting go and being in just being. For me personally, I think it's like the most healing journey I've been on the last years. So I'm just interested in what's going to happen next. But it's and I'm interested in as well how breath work maybe can get you more into the flow state.
Again, I think it comes down to what is going to be your definition of flow and how you, but I think breathing, again, ancient tool, presence, being kind of connected to yourself, being aware of yourself, building interoception, all those things are pretty anchored. How you apply it is really where I think that the phase of where we are with, we know it's helped, we know it's important. How we're applying it in different situations now is really where it's getting exciting. And again, I don't think, again, we know nothing about the human system, to be perfectly honest. We know little bits here and there. These are the questions that hopefully if we get this sort of these bigger ideas off the ground, we can start to really pull the communities together around. Because I think there's a lot to be said. I mean, again, even back to nature, there's a whole program now, how natural platforms just reset the cognitive systems in your brain because the fractal patterns in nature. And they're showing that even on computer images of fractals will reset you cognitively more efficiently than cityscapes or man-made or human-made structures. And those are just stuff that, you know, if you walk in the woods, you feel better. We've known for centuries, but now we're actually getting the science to prove it. So just simply, I think it's a bold frontier of what we can learn and understand in this space, and it's exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Lana, you're off.
Hey.
Hey, first of all, happy birthday. I know day late, but speaking of community, Lana's been a long time member of our community and been on so many wonderful memories with you. So anyways, do you have a question for Andy?
Yeah, Andy, hi. Good to see you
Hey,
again.
Lana, how are
Hi. It's been a while with all this craziness. Yeah, I want to ask you a question about the nutrition and high performance. Like, what is the latest? You know, people always chasing the trends, you know? Like, I want to see like where you are in this space.
Yeah. Well, I think you've seen some of the results. I think we've gone through. We went from we went from basic nutrition education to good basic eating habits to obviously it's. We then went to super sophisticated blood genetic testing, and we still do that. I mean, thousands and thousands of samples of information around an individual and how to optimize what they eat. And I think on the flip side, we're now at a position where we can actually create highly specific nutritional profiles for you and then give you the right tools to manage it. Where I think the future and where we're seeing the real interesting stuff again comes back to this precision performance concept. Everybody is so different, and some really interesting stuff coming out of Israel. Again, why this sort of glucose thing has popped up again, why I'm playing with this new is that there's a group there showing that, you know, the classic thing is if you eat a lot of whole carbs, whole grain carbs, it's better for your insulin response than it is for simple sugars. Drink a bottle of pop. But they've actually shown, and this is where it ties in interestingly, depending on your gut biome, that sugar response and the impact of that, quote unquote, bad foods on you can be highly specific. So case in point, they show that, I should eat whole grain breads and foods and keep my fiber and roughage up. Absolutely. A lot of research on that. But I think they've shown that if you have a certain pattern of biome in your gut, that'll actually send sugar levels through your system and have the negative effects. And that person actually is far better eating white bread. So, and vice versa. Again, this is why I get sort of frustrated when I read all these sort of top 3 things to eat well.
Yep.
Probably generally good, okay. Don't go out and eat bars and bars of chocolate every day. But when it gets to you and understanding you, very simple things like that, which we think we understand, are very nuanced based on individuals. So I think modifying biome, which is what this group is looking at, to create the impact of food and nutrition and optimize the nutritional performance is really the next frontier. And then that in turn has staggering impact on your cognitive function. So we can change the biome and turn you from a brave person into a scared person. I mean, that data is being proven in animals and sort of similarly replicated in early stuff on mental work. So it's an interesting new time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Lana. We're just coming up on the hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If everyone wants to stay on, we'll stop the recording, and then I think Andy said he could stay on for a little bit more for Q&A, but I know he's a busy guy, so it won't take too much of your time. So let me just close this up, and then everyone stay on, and I will promote you so we can stay on and chat a little bit more. And love it if anyone who's not, I know some people are in Australia and it's like 1 a.m., but if people are not in their PJs and they want to join and turn on their camera, please do that. But we'll turn off the recording in a second. Thank you again, Andy, for joining us. This recording is going to be live on the ACTI Global website soon. We have our next fireside chat in 2 weeks. As I mentioned, August 19th with Dr. Sylvia Earle. She's the president and chairman of Mission Blue and a National Geographic Society Explorer in Residence. She's been called her deepness by the New Yorker and the New York Times as a living legend by the Library of Congress, and the first hero for the planet by Time Magazine. So she is going to share her lifetime of experience as a field research scientist, government official, and director for corporate and nonprofit organizations. So you can always register on the ACTI website, acti.global. And until our next fireside chat, hope you stay healthy and stay inspired and stay on, and we'll chat with Andy a little bit more. Thanks.